Is the sky falling on the Zags? Welcome all into another episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. The big upset, Santa Clara taking down Gonzaga on Saturday. We'll get into that. San Francisco bouncing back with a big week for them. St. Mary's continuing to roll and begins its toughest stretch of the season, and we'll get into that as well. And then, of course, we'll do a little bit of previews for Thursday. We're also going to talk to Andy Patton from the Locked On Zags and Locked On College Basketball podcasts and review the Zags game as well. And we're going to start with that game, with that upset, and the implications that this is going to have moving forward. So, looking at this Santa Clara game, Santa Clara went on the road into Spokane and won 103-99 in regulation. It is the Broncos' first win in Spokane since February 12th of 2007. It is the most points ever allowed by Gonzaga at the Kennel. The previous was 94 set by St. Joe's, and that was with Jameer Nelson and Delonte West. Tyree Bryan with 35 points and 7 made threes. He is the 12th player this season to match or set a career high and the 7th career high against the Zags so far this season. Santa Clara has now its 5th quad 1, quad 2 game. They have now beaten the Zags in consecutive seasons, both in the month of January. They made 18 threes in this game, which is a wild number. They were plus 8 rebounding. They shot 53% from the field. This was an impressive outing by the Broncos. This was a wildly disappointing loss for the Zags, who lost their second straight conference game after also losing to Oregon State. Santa Clara going into this game, getting this win, thinking about how they also played against USF a week ago, how they also had already beaten Oregon State. Yes, they did lose to LMU on Thursday, but you look at what they have been able to accomplish so far in conference play, and this Santa Clara team is starting to really look the part of a team that could make a run in Las Vegas. This is a team that could, if they continue to play like they have for the most part in conference play, are going to challenge, I think, for that double bye, not just the quarterfinal bye, but maybe even to the semis, getting one of those top 2 seeds. And they put themselves in position well, obviously with wins against 3 of the other contenders for that spot potentially. They looked great offensively, and everything went their way. Tyree Bryan, every time they needed a bucket, got a bucket. Adama Alpha Ball came alive in the second half. He had 20. Christoph Tilley had a good night. He stayed out of foul trouble, stayed on the floor. And they were up 10 late in this game. Like, they were starting to pull away until the Zags made a late charge, sparked by Ben Gregg. Ben Gregg was one of the more consistent guys for the Zags. He had 13 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists. Nolan Hickman has been playing really well the last couple weeks. He had 24 points to lead the Zags 6-10 from 3. Ryan Nembhard had a double-double, 16 points, 15 assists. But maybe one of the more shocking numbers was seeing Caleb Battle with 0. First time he's gone scoreless this season. So, again, looking at the offense, like, Gonzaga's offense hasn't been the problem. They scored 99 points in this game. The problem is that they allowed 103. The problem is that their last 4 games, they've allowed 80, 75, 97, 103. Their rotations haven't been good. They've allowed a lot of clean looks from 3. They have allowed their last 3 opponents to shoot 53% or better. This is a team that is now 3-6 in quad 1, quad 2 games, which obviously, like, they still have 3 quad 1 wins, but the win percentage on that is not great. this isn't a good look for a Gonzaga team who now sits with 2 losses in WCC play, is actually staring up at not just one team, but multiple teams in the standings. And it's St. Mary's, obviously at 6-0, but also Santa Clara and also USF. These are 2 teams that they were staring upward at, and they're actually tied 3-way with Santa Clara and Washington State at the moment. Obviously, they have the tiebreaker against Washington State at the moment. Long way to go in conference play still. But Oregon State's at 4-3 as well. They're right there in the mix. This is turning into a really interesting early half of conference play because we're starting to see so much more of the parity. And we talked about the parity last week when we saw Santa Clara beating Oregon State beating Gonzaga, USF beating Santa Clara, Washington State beating USF. We've started to see all these pieces of Gonzaga beating Washington State, that there were a lot of these teams just beating up on each other. And it has created this kind of not middle of the pack per se, but like there are a lot of teams who are still in the mix, about a third of the way through conference play, a little more than a third of the way through conference play. And thinking about what the next few weeks is going to bring, there are a lot of really good matchups going into this week. Even looking at the games for this coming week, you have St. Mary's hosting San Francisco, Washington State, and Santa Clara. Santa Clara on Saturday is going to be heading up to Corvallis to take on the Beavers, and then St. Mary's is at Washington State. You do have also Pepperdine taking on Oregon State, and that's going to be an interesting one because that Pepperdine team has put up some pretty good fights as of late, maybe not against St. Mary's, but they've definitely had some good outings recently as well. And so you think about what is coming up in WCC play, what we're going to see in some of these contests. This is, to me, going to be one of the more balanced, one of the more interesting conference races that we have seen in a long time, because while St. Mary's has separated itself a little bit, their tough stretches coming up. We're going to get into that a little bit, but 1 through 6, I think there's a very good possibility that we see. I think we know who 1 or 2 is going. 2 teams that are going to take the top spot. That's still in my head. It's going to be either St. Mary's or Gonzaga. But number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think is up in the air, and we could see any ordering that you could possibly think of. Obviously, maybe not Gonzaga or St. Mary's down at 6, but I think it's very possible that we could see Gonzaga not in the 2 slot. With the way they have played defense to this point, especially when it looks like it's just getting worse, there are some really good offenses in this conference. Washington State, Santa Clara, Oregon State, USF. Like this is a Gonzaga team that is going to have to figure something out defensively, fix some rotations. They might have to do some tweaks with the lineup that maybe not benefit on the offensive end. We'll get into that a little bit later as well. But Gonzaga has problems right now, and it's not the complete sky is falling. It's not them missing the tournament bad, but it is once you get to the tournament, it's not good. Like, this is not a team that is set up to do real damage in the tournament. Not especially when you think about this was a team we all thought was going to make a deep, deep run with all the continuity and then even the added pieces that they were able to bring in. Now, before we get any further with that, I'm going to bring in Andy Patton so we can talk a little bit more in depth about what he sees as wrong with this Zags squad and what this might look like going through the rest of WCC play. Happy to bring in Andy Patton from the Locked On Zags and Locked On College Basketball podcast to talk about what we saw from Gonzaga this past week. And obviously, this was a rough go for the Zags. And on Saturday, we saw what was a historic, somewhat embarrassing, especially if you ask the players. The players brought this up. Braden Huff, Nolan Hickman in the press conference talked just about like how this was almost an affront to Gonzaga basketball and the way it went down the other night. Looking at this game, like they have 6 losses now, back to back in WCC play for the first time since 2014. where are you on the panic meter for this Zags team? Where for a team that we thought was going to be better than the team a year ago, and they look to be almost in the exact same spot that they were 12 months ago.
Yeah, I think they're in a little bit of a worse spot in some ways, but also it's interesting because like last year they didn't have as many bad losses at this time last year. They had the loss to Santa Clara last year as well, but they didn't have like they didn't have back-to-back losses in conference play. They didn't have some of the issues they're having. But at the same time, at this time last year, 12 months ago, the Zags didn't have any quad one wins. And that was the huge storyline for Gonzaga last year was they need to pick up quad one wins. And they hadn't played Kentucky yet. And obviously that game was a huge kind of catalyst for their turnaround last season. And then they played St. Mary's, they played San Francisco. They were able to pick up some quad one wins there. And ultimately, things ended smoothly for them in another run to the Sweet 16. But this year, they currently have 2 quad one wins. They're 2-5 in quad one games, which is not a good record, but it is the most important thing is how many quad one wins you have. The record matters, but it also just matters that you have those wins. Having 2 more at this time than they did last year does put them in a little better spot. Now, Baylor very tenuously hanging on to being a quad one win for Gonzaga. Last time at this time last week, there we go. They were 20th in the net, and they have to be top 30, and now they're 28th after losing at home to TCU. So it feels like that game might get slipped away, but and I know this is another thing to discuss, but one of the nice things about being in the WCC this year is that you do have more quad one opportunities, more opportunities to kind of boost that resume going forward this year. I mean, Gonzaga's still got both games against USF, both games against St. Mary's. They got Washington State on the road. Like they have opportunities that there weren't as many of last year during the regular season. And so the panic meter is fairly high in the sense that the expectations we had for Gonzaga coming into this year have to be reset. They have to be reset. I mean, and the expectations coming into the year were sky high. This team was expected to be better than they were last year. This team was expected to be, they were ranked in the top 10 to start the year. They climbed into the top 5. There was talk of them being number 1. They're expected to be a team that competed for an Elite 8, Final 4, potential national championship. At this point, that cannot be the expectation. Doesn't mean they won't get there. But if you still have the same expectations for this team of Sweet 16 being like the baseline, then the panic meter is extremely high. You're talking 9 or 10, like full on, like there's the odds of them getting back there have shrank rapidly. If you're just thinking, all right, just keep the streak going, get in the big dance, hopefully you get that Sweet 16 streak going, then I think you feel like you're in a better spot because you still have enough opportunities, to pick up big wins, to get the quad one record in a better shape than it is now. I mean, I think I was kind of looking at for my show for Zags, like the odds of Gonzaga missing the tournament, I feel like are still pretty low. Like they would have to be pretty bad the rest of the season. Now, they're not looking good right now, so I understand why there's some panic around that. But, if you split with St. Mary's, you sweep San Francisco, which feels very doable. Even if you split all 4 of those games, you're probably still going to make the NCAA tournament. You might be in a gross seed, a seed we haven't seen Gonzaga at in a long time. You might get that dreaded 8-9 where it's going to be real difficult to keep the Sweet 16 streak going, but you're not. I don't think that the panic of like, oh no, Mark Few is going to miss the tournament for the first time. That panic meter is probably only at like a 4 or maybe a 5, at least for me, because I think there's already enough in their resume, despite not winning as many close games as they should. There's still enough good wins on the resume. There's still enough opportunities going forward that I think things are going to shake out okay in that respect. But certainly the expectations are lower than they were at the start of the year.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about it before the season, just like that baseline was kind of the Sweet 16 and kind of building off of that because of some of the transfers that came in, because of some of the other pieces. One of the things that I started thinking about, and I know like you kind of touched on it today on Locked On Zags as well, is this idea of like about the transfers. And one of the things I kind of started to look at, it's like there aren't as many of the homegrown leaders that we're used to seeing on this Zag squad. I mean, Ben Gregg obviously is a Zag through and through, but a lot of times we're used to seeing that person be the best player on the team, a Drew Timme, and Anton Watson, a Corey Kispert throughout the years. We've seen it a Zag, like a 4-year Zag be kind of that guy. And despite Ben Gregg being obviously great in his role, You don't have that guy at the end of the game who is that kind of like that, who's been able to take over. So kind of like, what are your thoughts on just kind of like the fact that like that there seems to be at least a little bit of this shift and how that's impacted maybe what we've seen on the court?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting issue for Gonzaga, because I think you're right that it is an issue. And it's funny, you kind of described two separate things, but they're sort of the same issue. They lack somebody to go to at the end of games. They lack somebody who can kind of take over in a way that, and often you think of guards for that, but Drew Timme was capable of doing that at Gonzaga. Even Anton Watson did it for Gonzaga last year, and that was never kind of expected to be his role. But he scored, I think, 35 against UCLA, and he scored similarly 34, 35 against Santa Clara. Granted, they lost that game, but he had a monster game. And this year's team lacks that kind of go-to late game, who's going to get us a bucket type player. And they also are lacking some of that homegrown leadership. And you mentioned Ben Gregg. I'll also mention Nolan Hickman, because he's the other four-year starter, or four-year player at Gonzaga who is a starter in the current lineup. But neither of them fill the like team leader, vocal leader, emotional leader role for this team. Ben Gregg is a glue guy. I mean, that's exactly what he is. He's one of the few players on this team that I think is a positive offensively and defensively. Most players are one or the other, which is part of the problem that they're having, I think. But Ben does contribute in both areas. He's a hustle guy. He's a glue guy. He is emotional, and he shows it, but he's not a leader. I mean, he's not he's rarely their leading scorer in games. It's a surprise when that happens. Like, that's just not the role that he's supposed to fill on this team. And Nolan Hickman isn't either. And Nolan Hickman's probably their most clutch player, which is, it's great. They need him to hit threes at certain points, and he does that. And he's been very good in the last few games. But again, him playing really well in games Gonzaga loses, I mean, that's not, your leaders need to help you find a way to win. And Nolan is doing his part, but his part is not that same role. He's not that leader. He's not that, floor general. That's Ryan. And Graham's kind of your best player, your offensive focal point. He's very emotional, but Graham and Ryan are both guys who are 1.5 years into their Gonzaga career. And I think that, combined with Battle being new, with Ajayi being new, with, guys like Dusty and Braden being young in their careers, I think you do have this kind of mix of talented players who've all come to Gonzaga from different ways. And Mark Few's used to that. He's used to building rosters that have a mix of, highly regarded freshmen, of under the radar freshmen, of transfers, of 4-year guys. Like, he's always had a mix, but he's also always had a clear leader, a clear veteran guy like Drew, or like Kispert, like you mentioned, and going back farther, like Kevin Pangos, and et cetera, et cetera. We know the names. There have been so many of them. And this year, Ryan Nembhard is one of the best point guards in the country, but he's not that guy, and he's not somebody who's been in the system for a long time. So I do think that is causing some of Gonzaga's issues this year, and in a variety of different ways. I think it's causing them to struggle down the stretch of games like we've seen. I think it's causing some of the lulls that we see from this team. This is one of the most elite offensive teams in the country, and yet they'll go through stretches where they just look completely flummoxed offensively. And I think that is because you don't have somebody who can kind of take the reins and lead this team. And so it is an issue, and it's an unfortunate one, because, I like to try to look for what are issues that the team can fix. That's not one that you can fix. Like, that's one you can start to address for next year, sort of. But again, I mean, next year, Dusty and Braden will be upperclassmen, but, you still are kind of lacking that homegrown 3-4 year leadership type player. And I think that has been among a handful of issues for Gonzaga, especially lately.
Yeah. So, I mean, thinking about this, like, obviously you say it's one of the concerns, but obviously the biggest one is, it's got to be the defense, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, it's clearly like that defensive end. So, like, as you're watching this team on the defensive side of the ball, it's like, what are you seeing them not do that we're used to seeing? Especially, like, it felt like Gonzaga's defense early in the season was almost its strength. And it seems like it has just continued to deteriorate over the course of the year. What are you seeing from the squad?
Yeah, it's a combination of a couple of things. One thing, Mark Few's never run a particularly, we'll call it what it is, good defensive set. Like, their defensive, like, what they do defensively has never really been super elite. When they've had good defenses in the past, it's because they've had very good individual defensive players. They have had a few teams that collectively were good defensively. The 17 team that went to the national championship, that was a team that was filled with players who were dogs, who was filled with players who were good on that end of the floor. They had 4 bigs who were all plus defensive players. They were big, physical. Their guards were bigger. And so the system that they ran at that time worked. They also had a lot of veteran guys, which really helped. The 21 team was good because Jalen Suggs, I mean, look, he's one of the best defensive guards in the NBA. He's literally one of the best defensive guards on the planet. That's what Gonzaga needed to have him, and then the next year to have Chet, 2 of the best defensive players at their respective positions currently playing basketball. That's what was required for Gonzaga to have decent defenses. And this year, the personnel is just not good. I mean, this is not a collection of particularly talented players defensively, combined with being in a system that hasn't really ever been a super positive for Gonzaga on that end. So that combination of things, very problematic. And I think it's also a mixing and matching issue. The best individual defensive players on Gonzaga's roster are among their worst offensive players. Michael Ajayi being one of them. He has been a massive disappointment, particularly offensively, but he is a pretty good on-ball defender and a tenacious rebounder. But if you cannot play him because he does literally nothing on offense, then you're stuck. You're stuck in this. And Ben Gregg's probably their best starter defensively, so Ajayi doesn't add enough on that end of the floor. Dusty Stromer's a good defensive guard, but he's been really struggling on the offensive side of the ball lately. He's had his ups and downs this year, but that's not his strength right now. And then Emmanuel Innocente is probably their second best, if not their best, on-ball defensive player on the wing, but he's not ready to be a significant offensive contributor. So for the Zags, they haven't figured out how to, they play a lineup that basically features probably their 4 worst defensive players because they're good offensively. And then it results in games like you had against Santa Clara where you give up 103 points. You scored 99. That's great. Gonzaga's they've scored 80 points in every single game in the year 2025, 80 plus points in every game. They've scored 90 in 4 of the last 5. And the one that they didn't was Washington State, where they scored 88. This offense, not the problem whatsoever. To score 90 plus points in 4 out of your last 5 games and to lose 2 of them is a massive issue. And I think it's time for the staff to figure out we need to sacrifice some offense for defense. Whether that's playing Michael at a different position so we can play alongside Ben, whether that's starting Dusty and hoping that offense comes around, whether that's inserting Emmanuel Innocente into the rotation on a more regular basis, all of those have to be on the table, because continuing to roll out a team that can score 100 points a game doesn't matter if you keep losing games.
Right. And even just thinking about those games, it's not like they're losing by a lot in these contests. Like, they have 6 losses on the year. It's by 4, 8, 3, 6, 1, and 8. Mm-hmm. They are 2 and 6 in games that are decided by 10 or fewer points. So it's not like you have to sacrifice that much offense to get some defense onto the floor for this team. And thinking about just how close some of these games have been, it feels like that we've talked about the late game execution, or the lack thereof, the late game execution. It's like, is there something that they can do? Like, maybe it is just flipping some of it, like adding a couple of defensive players at the end of games, just so that you can try to close games out and leave some of your elite offensive guys. Like, seeing Graham Ike off the floor late in games is kind of strange. Like, when you think about, like, he's your likely the in the short list of potential WCC players of the year, potential All-American, and he can't be on the floor late in game because of his defense. It does seem wild that we're seeing these sorts of situations.
Yeah, and I mean, the problem with that is if Graham's off the floor, Braden's on the floor, and he's not any better defensively either. I mean, they just it's a personnel thing, and I think that's part of it. Is like, if they had better options, if they could go offense, defense to the 5 position, that'd be great, but they can't really, and so they're hamstrung by not having options at certain positions to kind of fill in defensively. But yeah, I do think that this team has issues with late game situations. The clutch factor hasn't really been there. It's frankly been an issue for Ryan for the last 2 years. He missed clutch free throw against Santa Clara last year that would have potentially got him a W there. He missed a free throw that would have potentially got them a W against UCLA this year. And then he threw up a 41-foot 3 when he had 4 more seconds to potentially get another shot. That was really hard to watch in that situation. I mean, shoot, the most clutch shot anybody's made this year was Graham Ike banging a 3 against Oregon State, which was awesome. Don't get me wrong. You could hear a pin drop at Gill Coliseum when he made that 3, but it didn't result in a W. So, it doesn't really matter in that situation. And so it's been tough to see this team not seem to have kind of that X factor down the stretch, not be able to utilize their offensive weapons late in games, but the issue is earlier in games. The issue is that you shouldn't be playing close games. Like, you shouldn't be playing, no disrespect to either Oregon State or Santa Clara. They're both good teams, but you're not supposed to be in close games there. You need to be beating those teams. Like, beating Oregon State on the road was always going to be hard, but you had a lead. You had a lead with 5-6 minutes to go, a fairly comfortable lead, and you squandered it. You threw it away, and it's like, you can point to the issue being not having the late game kind of clutch factor, but at the end of the day, the issue is you got to start winning that game earlier. Dusty Stromer picked up 4 fouls in 15 minutes against Oregon State. You couldn't play him in the last 5 minutes. You couldn't play him in overtime. He's your best perimeter defensive player. So when Mikey Ratai goes crazy, when DeMarco Minor goes crazy in the last few minutes of that game, Dusty not being on the floor is a factor. And that happened because of mistakes he made earlier in the game. So it's like, there's just a lot of different things that continue to contribute to this program's struggles, and some of it's coaching. And I know that some people it's easy to just immediately blame the coach. And I think that in some ways, Mark Few, it's a personnel issue, which is also falls on the coaching. But in some situations, they've kind of not had many options. They haven't been able to take Graham out because Braden's a worse defender. They haven't been able to play Dusty because of there's various things that happen that put them in uncompromising positions at the end of games, and that's why you have that 2-6 record in those close games.
Now, one of the things, and maybe this is just a little bit of the pause for Zag fans and thinking about where this team is that maybe one of the factors is the fact that the conference is better, is deeper this year, especially at the top, than we've seen. Oregon State and Washington State have obviously added some much needed depth, but Santa Clara, USF have gotten better. Santa Clara has the most quad 1, quad 2 wins of anyone in the WCC. Yeah. Yes, they have a couple quad 3 losses, but they're competing with the better teams that they're facing. Right. So while is the challenge maybe just this is what Gonzaga kind of wanted all along, and this sometimes is just the result of having a deeper conference? You're gonna end up with some of these losses.
Yeah, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. I mean, it's not a good thing in the sense that Gonzaga has lost 2 straight games, obviously, but it's a good thing. I mean, it's very easy to see why it's a good thing, because right now, looking at the rest of Gonzaga's schedule, if somebody, people who are concerned about do they have, because when Gonzaga gets, when they fall out of the top 25 like they did, or when suddenly you actually do have to pay attention to what does this team need to do to make the tournament, which is just not a conversation that we have to have all that often. One of the concerns that always comes up is there's no more opportunities to pick up good wins. That's not the case. That's not the case for Gonzaga. And so I think it's not fun to lose on the road to Oregon State. It's not fun to lose at home to Santa Clara. But here's the deal. Right now, looking at the rest of Gonzaga's schedule, not including WCC tournament games, they have the most games remaining are quad 1. And again, it'll change. It'll fluctuate. But right now, both games against St. Mary's are quad 1. At Santa Clara, at San Francisco, those are all quad 1 games as of right now. Then they have 3 quad 2 games. So 7 of their remaining 11 games that they're playing in the regular season, 7 of them are quad 1, quad 2. That does not happen in the WCC for most of the last 25 years. So for Gonzaga, they are now in a position where, that's why, many years at this point in the year, you still had to win the WCC tournament. You had to, in the first 10 years of Mark Few's coaching, that was it. You had to do that. Now that's not necessarily the case. Now, if Gonzaga, gets swept by St. Mary's, goes 1-2 against San Francisco, then they got to win the big dance. They got to win in Vegas. But at this point, they're not in that position. And that is not entirely, but it is very much because the WCC has enough strength right now. And again, I say that this is going to fluctuate. Yeah, if teams drop out of the quad 1, it could be because somebody moved up. Like Washington State might move back into being a quad 1 game. And if Santa Clara drops, maybe it's because San Francisco, there's movement that could still result in Gonzaga picking up potentially 2, 3, 4 more quad 1 wins. Now they have to go out and get those W's, and there's no guarantee they're going to do that. St. Mary's going to be a problem for this team, but they have the opportunity, and in years past they haven't. So this is a good thing. This is a good thing. It is not fun to lose those games, and it is not fun to keep seeing records like Gonzaga hasn't lost to Santa Clara at home since 2007, and it's not fun to keep hearing that. I know that. I know for Gonzaga fans listening, they were real tired of hearing that on the broadcast. But at the end of the day, this conference being better is what is very likely going to help Gonzaga stave off a potential where if they lose to St. Mary's or somebody in the WCC tournament, they're sweating on Selection Sunday. Or at this point, the ball's in their court, and they can still control that. And for many years in the WCC, they wouldn't have been able to.
Right. I mean, right now, I think a lot of people have kind of slid them down to like a 6 seed, 7
Yeah.
seed, somewhere in that range. And
Mhm.
obviously, plenty of opportunities to still kind of
Yep.
get back up. And because this
Mhm.
team was a 5 seed a year ago for a team that everyone thought was worse a
Yeah.
year ago than this team. If
Yeah.
that team could get a 5 seed,
Mhm.
obviously, like that fluctuates based on everyone else in college
Right.
basketball and what they're doing. And BYU not being
Yes. Yeah.
the other team across the
Yeah.
way to slide you in. But the WCC, like based off of what you saw this past week against Oregon State, against Santa Clara, I mean, it feels like for Vegas that this actually might be the most wide open the tournament might be
Mhm.
once we get to March, because again, Oregon State has proven that they can go in, they can
Mhm.
beat Gonzaga. Santa
Mhm.
Clara has proven they can go into the kennel and beat
Mhm.
Gonzaga. Like
Mhm.
we've seen, like everybody else, like Washington State has beaten USF. USF has
Mhm.
beaten Santa Clara. Santa Clara
Yeah.
has beaten Oregon State.
Mhm.
LMU has beaten Oregon State and Santa Clara. St.
Right.
Mary's has yet to lose yet, but they also haven't played anybody in the top half of the league
Right.
at this stage. It really feels like that maybe for once the WCC tournament is
Mhm.
going to be more chaotic than we've ever seen it.
Yeah. I agree with you, but how many times have we thought maybe it won't be Gonzaga and St. Mary's, and it still ends up being Gonzaga and St. Mary's. This definitely feels like a year where it could be different. And I think you're right that part of it is that we haven't seen St. Mary's kind of get into that mix of those, the Santa Claras, the San Franciscos, the Gonzagas, Wazoo's of the world. And if St. Mary's just blows through all those teams, which I don't think is likely, just because it's really, really gonna be hard with how good those teams are and how many different kind of styles that they play. But at this point, St. Mary's is obviously the team to beat. That's very clear. But it is a big mess after that. And I don't think that St. Mary's, again, because they haven't played that quality schedule yet, they have not separated themselves by very much. Like they've separated themselves in the standings in a way that makes them feel pretty comfortable that they're going to get a double bye. Like I would feel pretty good if I was St. Mary's right now and feeling like the odds of us dropping to third is pretty slim. Whereas for Gonzaga, they're currently third, tied for third. Granted, they're a half game behind San Francisco just because they've played more games, but still, like Gonzaga is very much in the driver's seat to potentially get back to number one or at least top two and get that double bye. But yeah, Oregon State's in that mix too. San Francisco's in that mix still too. Santa Clara's in that mix. Washington State's in that mix. There's 6 teams vying for those top 2 spots, and then once you get into the dance, 4 of those teams that don't get those spots, they're going to beat each other up, And I don't think that there's a lot of teams outside of those top 6 or 7 that are super realistic candidates to pull off a major upset. Maybe Pacific has done some weird stuff. Who knows? Maybe they could do something. But it just feels like there's more teams that are kind of all mixed together, and it'll be fun to see how it shakes out.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild rest of conference play. This like it's showing them more and more that this is going to be a more competitive league. It's a deeper league. I mean, Santa Clara I've said like maybe the most dangerous team in the
Mm-hmm.
conference at this stage with what they've accomplished to this point. And of course, with the Zags, it's can you figure something out? Can you start to play better defense in some way, shape, or form?
Mm-hmm.
I do feel sorry for Portland on
Yeah.
Thursday because they are
Yeah.
the next team
Yeah.
the Zags will face. Andy, it's always great having you on talking some Zags basketball, and we will definitely catch up probably in a couple weeks when the Zags and Gales meet up for
Yeah.
round 1.
Yeah. Looking forward to that one, Zach. Thanks so much for having me on.
Quad 1, Quad 2 records in the WCC are kind of fascinating to take a look at. Again, like think about the depth of the league. Santa Clara is sitting at 5-4, the most wins of any team in the WCC. Washington State is sitting at second with 4. St. Mary's, San Francisco, and Gonzaga all have 3. Oregon State with 2. And actually, even I forgot to mention because I kind of ordered them on my list in by win percentage. LMU also has 3 quad 1, quad 2 victories, and they have played the most quad 1, quad 2 games so far this season. They're 3-7, which accounts for I think all but one of their losses this season. But even LMU has gotten into the action of playing well against some of these better teams. Again, win against Oregon State, win against Santa Clara. They do have a win against Nevada. They have some good wins on their resume as well. But this really kind of talks about how much depth there is in this league, where you do have 6 teams in the top 80, which adds all these quad 1 and quad 2 opportunities inside of WCC play, which is very unusual to think about when you think about what the WCC has been for a long, long time. Even when BYU was here, you didn't see just the length and the depth that this league had, at least not that it does this year. And talking about one of those teams, two of those teams, Oregon State and San Francisco met up on Saturday, and this was a game that, to me, like, I think was a little like it meant different things to both of these squads. For Oregon State, it was, can you keep the momentum after Gonzaga? And for San Francisco, it's, you're still trying to pick yourself up off the mat after a bad loss at Santa Clara. And USF came out ready to play on this one. They led by as much as 22. They ended up winning by 11, 81-70. Malik Thomas, 24. Marcus Williams, 21. 13 for 22 from three-point range. Overall, 60% from the field. USF played really well, shot really well in this game. Oregon State, who was the best three-point shooting team by percentage in the league, was 1 for 9 in this one. The Oregon State woes on the road continue in this one. They're now 1-4 away in true road games this season. And USF, like 20 assists on 26 made field goals, distributed the ball really, really well. USF, they've won their last two games. They've won both of them pretty convincingly. They're going to get St. Mary's on Thursday, and this is a St. Mary's team that has won the last 10 meetings between they and the Dons. The last one coming on January 3rd, 2019. And this matchup for USF, for St. Mary's, this is going to be a battle for its rebounding and limiting mistakes. Because the two things that we know St. Mary's does incredibly well is that they rebound well and they do not beat themselves. If you are going to have a shot at beating them, you're going to have to at least hold your own on the boards. I don't expect too many teams to out rebound St. Mary's, but you got to be in the mix. So this is going to be a big focal point for the Dons as they think about that front line. Carlton Lingard is going to have to do some work on Mitchell Saxon. We're going to also need to see them try to keep Paulos Morauskas off the boards, off the glass. He's been one of their better rebounders so far this season. Luke Barrett is another guy you have to keep off the board. So I think Tyler Own Riley is going to be number one job is keep Luke Barrett in check, keep his activity low, and the freshman is going to be, I think, a unique matchup there. So that's, I think, one to watch. And this St. Mary's team has turned up the defensive clamps on really everybody. They're 6-0 in WCC play. They're winning by an average of 26.5 points. And yes, they played the bottom half of the league. It's been LMU, Pepperdine, San Diego, Portland, Pacific. They have beaten up on the teams they're supposed to beat up on. But the other thing to that is that they have yet to allow any of them to score more than 60. The defense has been turned up. It's starting to look like the defense we're all used to seeing from the St. Mary's squad. And offensively, they're starting to gel. Like, it really looks like right now that all the pieces are starting to fall into place. All the roles have been solidified. And now, it was kind of about this time a year ago where we saw St. Mary's hit their stride. That it was right at the end of the non-conference, right as they rolled into January, when they went on, I think it was their 16-game winning streak a year ago, and ran away with the league. This is where they are right now. They're at 6-0. They're starting their toughest 8-game stretch next. It starts with USF. And this USF squad, like, I think for St. Mary's, it's looking at that backcourt. It is Marcus Williams. It is Malik Thomas. St. Mary's has done over the years a very good job of taking away teams' best shooters, their best players. And we've seen them do that to Santa Clara. We've seen them do that to USF. We've seen them do that to Gonzaga. We've seen them do it to really everybody. Like if you have one guy who takes over a game or can take over a game, they are, I don't think it's necessarily a one-on-one matchup. I don't think St. Mary's has the best on-ball defenders. What they do is they do it collectively. They are the best team defense squad, maybe in the country, definitely in the WCC. And they're going to throw a bunch of different looks at Malik Thomas, a bunch of different looks at Marcus Williams to try to slow them down, probably make sure that they don't actually have a shot at the lane. Malik Thomas does a very good job of drawing fouls, so keeping the St. Mary's backcourt out of foul trouble, I think, is going to be critical in that one. If those two get off, USF obviously has a chance in this one. Like, I think that's one of always the things with games against St. Mary's. You have your key guys have to do well. Malik Thomas is going to have to do well. And obviously, like, an off night for him is still scoring 20 at this point. If he's at least at his average, if not better, they're in it. But it's Marcus Williams. Marcus Williams, if he has a night like he had the other night, like against Oregon State, they're going to have a very good shot to pull off what is going to be an upset of St. Mary's. If he has a night closer to what he had against Santa Clara, they have no shot against St. Mary's. So I think that's a couple of the keys. I think Tyrone Riley, if he can give them a little bit of something, obviously that helps. But for USF, is you have to check off all the boxes. You cannot turn the ball over. You better shoot well from three. You better rebound at a decent rate against the St. Mary's squad. If you can do those things, they will be there at the end of the game in Moraga, and they will have a shot to pull the upset and give St. Mary's their first loss of the season, the first loss of the conference season. And thinking about St. Mary's, so overall, they have their next game against USF. They have a tough week. It's USF and then at Washington State. The next 8 games are going to show us who St. Mary's actually is. The next 8 is USF, at Washington State, at Santa Clara, Gonzaga, at USF, at Oregon State, at home for Santa Clara, home for Washington State. These are all quad 1 and quad 2 games. I think the Washington State game is slipping into maybe quad 3 territory right now, but that could change in the interim. These are all essentially all quad 1, quad 2 opportunities. St. Mary's is 3-3 in those chances to this point. And they are playing their best defense right now. Their offense looks as good as it has all season long right now. And they're getting it from everywhere. It's not just one source. We've seen it come from Augustus Marshallonis. We've seen Jordan Ross have really good nights recently. We've seen Mikey Lewis also be part of that. We've seen Luke Barrett have his nights. We've seen it be Mitchell Saxon still. We've seen it from all over the court for St. Mary's. It's been very well balanced, which is what we're kind of used to seeing from these St. Mary's teams. And they're getting more confident as well. It's like, it really does feel, especially since that Utah State loss at home, that this team has started to fine tune a lot of the things that were going wrong at that point and during that game. This is a team that has found it offensively. They found it defensively. And in these next 8 games, this is where it's like, what is the correct expectation of what the St. Mary's team is? If this is a St. Mary's team that is going back to the tournament and could potentially start to slide up into those higher seeds, as we're starting to see them, they're 28 in the net as of right now. If St. Mary's goes 6-2 in this stretch and then comes out of that 12-2 overall in WCC play, I think you have to feel really good about where you are at that point. Now, I think that the one caveat is don't lose at home to anybody but Gonzaga is the only caveat I would have as far as the losses. But I could very easily see this team going 6-2 in this stretch. We know that they've played against USF very well over the last X number of years. They've played very well against Santa Clara over these X number of years, albeit Santa Clara, it is one of those teams that I think they can beat anybody on any given night. Gonzaga, obviously always tough, but this one is going to be in Moraga. You have Oregon State on the road, and we did see how tough that place can be for even Gonzaga, depending on what the crowd is going to look like. Washington State twice. This is a team with the Cougars that obviously we know can run and score. It's going to be a matter of their depth. But looking at these 8, if they are at 6-2, you're going to feel really good if you're a St. Mary's fan. If you're in that locker room, if they go out and finish that stretch with that record, that is going to, I think, almost solidify where they are going to be in WCC play. They're going to be one of those top 2 teams, because then after that, it softens up a lot. After that, you do also play Gonzaga one more time. You still have to play Oregon State one more time. But the bulk of the rest is done. You're done with Washington State. You're done with Santa Clara. You're done with USF. The rest will just be starting to kind of pad that conference record again to be one of those top 2 seeds. Now, if they're 4-4 or worse, then we're starting to look at a St. Mary's squad that's going to need to do some more work and to maybe not stay in the tournament, but to solidify a higher seed in the tournament. If they go 4-4 or worse in this stretch, you might be looking closer to like a 10 or 11. If they go 6-2, you might start to talk like 6 seed, 5 seed all over again. Again, like if they go 6-2 and they're already 28 in the net, you could very easily think about them scratching the top 20. And if they go 8-0, which I think is unlikely, highly unlikely, just based off the gauntlet that this is, then we are going to be really talking about the possibility of St. Mary's maybe staying out west for the first couple rounds, which I believe the closest location is Seattle. So we'll see, because this is the kind of the make or break for St. Mary's stretch. We've seen what they can do in the non-conference. Nebraska, good win. USC, better win now. And now we can see against these other conference opponents, USF is better than a year ago. Washington State looks good. Santa Clara looks good. Gonzaga, not as good, but it's still Gonzaga. Oregon State has looked better at times. They all present different challenges, but this is going to stretch for the Gales, that if they can get it out of it above water, that 6-2, maybe even 5-3, you should feel very confident going into March that this team is going to be there and really do have a shot at getting advancing a round or 2 in the NCAA tournament. Now, the other game to kind of watch for Thursday, did mention Washington State and Santa Clara. These 2 squads, almost like it feels like Santa Clara is riding on a high, obviously, right now, after that Gonzaga win. From them, you've got to avoid the letdown. And this is going to be the first matchup between these 2 squads this season. Santa Clara beat the tournament team from the Cougars a year ago. And that was a much better Washington State team that they beat than what this Washington State team is today. And the Santa Clara team is basically the same squad. Them being at home at the Levy Center does feel like it's going to be a good matchup for them. The size of Washington State is not going to bother them all that much. In fact, it might be the size of Santa Clara that's going to bother Washington State. Like, you think about Luwan Watts provides a lot of mismatches for a number of teams, but between Tyree Bryan and Elijah Mahi, it feels like that Santa Clara has the counter to him. They have the counter to the likes of Ethan Price and Dane Erickstrup and Tilly and Johnny O'Neill, and also Jake Ensminger. You have the counter to Nate Calmise with Carlos Stewart. Like, it feels like to me that this Santa Clara team matches up actually incredibly well with Washington State. They like to run. like Washington State. They're going to put up points like Washington State. They do many of the same things. They just have, to this point, have proven it against better opponents. Washington State may also have like their 4-4 in quad 1, quad 2 victories, but Santa Clara has done more or less the same job against similar teams, if not better. They both have beaten Bradley. They both played Gonzaga, and Santa Clara beat Gonzaga in the kennel, which is something that Washington State could not do. So I think this is still going to be a good game. I think this is going to be a punch-for-punch battle down at Santa Clara. But to me, this feels like a game that Santa Clara actually does have the edge. If they play anywhere near, they don't have to play to the level of what they did at Gonzaga, but if they play like they can and are capable of doing, like say they did against USF, or like they've even either game against USF, if they play that well, they'll win. They'll be able to take care of business at home against Washington State. And again, it's a big week for the Broncos. They go back to back with the two Pac-12 schools, Washington State on Thursday, and then they head up for Oregon State Saturday. And for Washington State, it's kind of a little bit of the flip for them. They're on the road at Santa Clara Thursday, and then host St. Mary's on Saturday. So this is also a challenging week for Washington State, as they get arguably the teams who are playing the two best in the WCC right now this week. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'd like to thank Andy Patton one more time for hopping on and talking Zags. Big week in the WCC. San Francisco St. Mary's, Washington State Santa Clara on Thursday. We will do a Saturday live to kind of preview the slate of games on the, what is that? The 26th, so the 25th. We'll preview all the games there as well. We'll searching for the guest for that one, so TBD on that. In the meantime, follow on social media at Post by Zach and at unofficial WCC Pod, and then also subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you listen to the podcast. All right, that'll do it. Thanks a lot, everybody, for watching, and I will catch you later.